If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Where do I start my tale? The beginning, you say? Good idea. I'm Mark Gallows, my wife is Kelly Gallows, and this is our story. I remember being born. Okay, just kidding there. But that would be the beginning, right? I'll skip ahead to when I first met Kelly Everett. We were 6 years old, and to me, girls were still icky and gross, so I was a bit annoyed that I had to spend time and play with a girl. It didn't matter to me that she was black. She was a girl, and that made her icky. Luckily, I got over that as I got older. Our dads had served together in the army back in Vietnam and had become best friends on the battlefield. After the war, they moved back home and got married. Dad to my mom and her dad to her mama. It turned out that Kelly and I were born around the same time, and Kelly's family moved to Santa Barbara, where my dad had his construction business. Dad gave Mr. Everett a job, and soon they became partners in the business. Everything was going well, but when Kelly and I entered 2nd grade, their construction business fell on hard times. They fell back on what they knew and re-enlisted in the U.S. Army. Over the years, we were stationed at several duty posts together. Kelly and I had grown to be the 2nd-generation best friends our parents had joked about when we were younger. So when we were posted together, we gravitated toward each other. Anyone who grows up as an army brat knows that moving every few years is tough, and you have to prove yourself at each new school to avoid getting bullied or shunned. So we stuck together and had each other's backs wherever we found ourselves. Our friendship grew even after we started dating others. To her, I was just her best friend, and she was the same to me. However, after my first breakup, we started a tradition. We would go to the mall on the Saturday following either of us breaking up to catch a movie, usually something violent and full of action. It was a way to work out our frustrations. Watching a sci-fi or action movie usually did the trick. We'd get pumped up and let our tensions and hurts flow out with the action on screen. As we entered our sophomore year of high school, our dads restarted their construction business, and this time it worked out really well. More and more jobs took them down to Los Angeles, and even as far up as Sacramento. They were sometimes gone for a week or two at a time, but they were in high demand. General contractors, especially competent ones, are always sought after as long as they don't keep their business too localized. As a result, Kelly and I became even closer to each other than to our own families. We also had a few close calls, and nearly crossed the line several times between best friends and lovers. We kept our cool, though barely. It got harder and harder, no pun intended, to stop myself from crossing the line with her. We didn't want to ruin our friendship. It all came to a head when we got dumped the week before our senior prom by our significant others. Ty just up and dumped Kelly over the phone, which caught everyone by surprise. Meanwhile, Bridget was in the process of writing me a Dear Mark letter, which she then delivered to my house without a word. She wouldn't even talk to me, so needless to say, we were both set for prom that Saturday. We lucked out and caught a Chuck Norris marathon on TV. Older Chuck movies are still great. Kelly was still a virgin, as was I. She was a leader and track star at our school while I played baseball. My buddy Tyrone had asked about dating Kelly, and I had introduced them. He played first base while I played second base. We racked up quite a few double plays, and were a great 1-2 punch offensively at the plate too. Tyrone had dated Kelly for almost a year, and a lot of others thought that they would get married after graduation despite Ty's history. Well, to make a long story short, Ty dumped Kelly a week before prom so he could take another girl. The girl he took was supposed to be my date, my aforementioned ex-girlfriend Bridget. That ended not just my relationship but also Kelly's relationship with Ty and my friendship with Ty. Oh, and Kelly's friendship with Bridget too. They had been on the cheerleading squad together. Pretty convoluted, right? Yeah, a lot of hurt had been hurled out at the exact same time with as little effort as possible. Ty and Bridget had hurt both my best friend and me simultaneously. Like I said, we lucked out with the Chuck Norris movie marathon that Saturday. Oh, Ty didn't get away with an incident though, but we'll get to that shortly. Kelly and I ended up going to prom together. I still had my 2 tickets, and neither one of us had a date, so it just made sense. We danced, we had fun, and that seemed to be a slap in the face to old Tyrone and Bridget. I still remember picking her up at her house, which was 2 houses down from mine, on the night of prom. She walked downstairs in that emerald green dress that hugged her figure like a second skin from the waist up. My breath caught in my throat as I wondered for the first time what Tyrone had been thinking. Mr. Everett saw my expression, chuckled deep in his throat, and told me to have his princess home by midnight. I vaguely remember agreeing to do so and took Kelly's hand. She looked stunning with her hair done and ringlets that fell around her lovely face. She wore minimal makeup, which she honestly didn't need at all. I was struck by how beautiful she looked that night and barely managed to squeak out, "You look very handsome." Kelly smiled, hugged me, and told me that I looked very handsome too. That broke me out of my hormonally driven stupor, and we were once again best friends. I was completely comfortable with her again. I even managed to pay attention to the road while driving us to prom. Well, Ty and Bridget, a fiery hot redhead, were rubbing our noses in it as often as possible, implying that Ty had stolen my girl and dumped Kelly while he was at it. At first, we ignored them. They weren't worth the trouble, but trouble would be coming Ty's way soon. In spite of that vow to keep our cool, Kelly nearly lost it a couple of times, and I admittedly wasn't far behind her. When Ty really kicked the taunting up a notch, he was getting too close to Bridget every chance he got. He would then look over at us and grin while Bridget would smirk. However, we steadied ourselves and kept our tempers in check barely. We had to keep our cool, and we did. My whole plan depended on it. Things went from bad to worse as everyone knew that Tyrone had stolen Bridget from me, while they looked at Kelly as my consolation prize. What they didn't know was that Bridget wasn't all she was cracked up to be. She was a decent kisser, but Kelly was better. No, the big secret was that Ty had stolen a lot of girlfriends with his smooth talk and the myth of his size. Ty's dog status had been our secret too. We laughed about his conquests, which I didn't take seriously. I started to worry after he bragged about how he stole Max Garrett's girl 3 months before he started dating Kelly. Max was an okay guy, even though we were only passing acquaintances. We jocks were cool to each other, mostly though. Other jocks found my love for comic books to be uncool. That was okay though. I had some nerd friends to talk comics with, and Kelly is a fan of some indie comics. I had worried because Max and Cheryl had a very public breakup, and she refused to tell anyone why she dumped Max. She had then moved away a month later. "I can't believe that a hole," Kelly whispered to me as we danced close during a slow song. Breaking me out of my reverie, she continued, "Of all the things that had happened to bring us to this point, it was coming up on the coronation of the king and queen. Don't worry about it, Kel. I talked to Max earlier this week. I also talked to Sam and Dave, and they're getting the word out too." I smirked as I whispered in her ear, "Besides, I have the hottest girl here in my arms right now." She smiled at me, showing off all her perfect teeth. "Damn, you are one smooth talker." She giggled and kissed me with her lush full lips. I returned her kiss, then she broke it to look at me seriously. "What are you planning?" she asked. "You'll see. Trust me." Before you and Ty started dating, he was a big-time dog when it comes to women. Turns out he still is. When he asked me to introduce you, he swore he was done with the crap he'd been doing. I unfortunately believed him, and I'm sorry for him hurting you. I nodded toward where they were dancing and shooting glares at us occasionally. "Okay, white boy, spill it. And don't worry about the..." He pulled. I interrupted. I knew he was a dog before we started dating, and I thought he changed too. She smirked back. "Well, remember just before you two started dating, and Max got dumped by Cheryl. I asked with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, that was you. No way, he didn't. Kelly said, stunned. Yep, exactly, I nodded. Cheryl had moved away shortly after that incident, and Max had never been told why she dumped him until earlier in the week. I made sure he needed to keep his cool until tonight somehow. Somehow, we all managed to keep word from getting out that something major was going down on prom night involving Tyrone. Kelly got a huge grin on her face as she got my meaning. You told Max, didn't you? I just nodded and smiled smugly. I caught Ty and Bridget glaring at us again and let them think what they wanted about my smugness. It was time for a bit of vengeance with a dash of style. The song ended, and we walked back to the punch bowl hand in hand, our fingers interlaced. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Our principal, Mr. Skinner, not the one from The Simpsons, though he was just about as goofy, announced. The votes are all in for prom king and queen. After announcing the second and first runners-up, neither of which were Ty and Bridget were even more convinced than before that they'd won. Then Mr. Skinner smiled out over the crowd as we reached the moment I'd been waiting for. And the winners are Mark Gallows and Kelly Everett. What the hell? Tyrone shouted in disbelief. He'd just been upstaged by his ex-friend and his ex-girlfriend. My vengeance was complete. Yeah, Tyrone. What the hell? Max said as he came up behind my former buddy with Sam and Dave beside him. What the hell were you doing going after Cheryl? What the hell were you doing with Cheryl that caused her to break up with me? You know, I didn't believe it at first, but when I called Cheryl up, we're still friends. By the way, she confirmed what Mark told me about what you were saying. Ty shot me a glare full of hatred before grinning at Max. Hey man, that was just this guy bullshitting. I never did anything with Cheryl, man. Max wasn't buying it, and neither were the other guys who'd had their girls stolen by Tyrone. Yes, I told all three of them. I said, like I said, when Ty stole mine, we were no longer brothers, so the bro code was no longer in effect. He really should have thought of that before he set his sights on Bridget, but then he always thought with his little head first. Kelly and I went up on stage where our crowns were waiting. We were crowned king and queen, and after thanking everyone who voted for us, we took the dance floor for our coronation dance. I glanced around, but Ty and the guys whose girlfriends he'd messed with weren't in the gym anymore, nor was Bridget. I leaned forward and kissed my best friend as her lips parted from mine. God, you're beautiful, I whispered as we broke the kiss. You're pretty fine yourself, she whispered back as she nestled closer to me. Her presence, though petite and athletic, felt perfectly matched with mine. Her heels made her slightly taller, just right for us to kiss comfortably. To be honest, I had shared a kiss with Kelly before when we were stationed in Germany with our parents. We were in junior high and had experimented with each other. It was innocent curiosity, but it meant a lot to us. My best friend was my first kiss, and that bond was special. My thoughts shifted back to the present as Max and the guys returned to the gym. Ty and Bridget were missing, but I was with Kelly now, and that was all that mattered. I felt confident that she would always be true to me. Max and the guys looked satisfied as they rejoined their dates, and it was clear that justice had been served. Kelly and I enjoyed our moment as prom king and queen. She was stunning, her beauty even more radiant that night. It made me wonder how Tyrone could have let her go. As we headed back to the punch bowl, our friends' support told us they respected how we handled the situation. We had kept our dignity and enjoyed our night. I had planned to take Kelly home after prom and maybe attend an after-party. However, Kelly had her own plans. As prom came to an end, she pulled me close and whispered, "The night isn't over yet. I think it's time we talk about something we should have done a long time ago." Her words were clear, and I understood her meaning. I felt a deep connection and knew I was falling for her in a new way. "I feel the same, Kelly. If we take this step, it's because I truly care about you. I want this to be more than just a moment." Kelly smiled and assured me, I love you too, Mark. I've been falling for you too. Her smile and the warmth in her eyes confirmed her feelings. We shared a kiss that felt different from the ones before, a kiss that promised a future together. It was a moment of deep connection, filled with hope and love for what lay ahead. As soon as we broke the kiss, Kelly whispered softly, "I'm yours, Mark, forever and always. Remember what I told you when we were 10. I smiled as I recalled our conversation from when we were in Georgia. Yeah, I remember. Should we get married before I go to basic training or after I get home? Let's do it after, I replied with a grin. We need to plan everything and let our families know, and I need to get you a ring. We left the prom and headed to a special spot of ours, the bluffs overlooking the Pacific near Santa Barbara. It was a place where we could talk privately and share our dreams. Once we arrived, Kelly pulled out a blanket from the back seat and spread it on the grass. We sat down, and I took her hand, looking into her eyes. "I'm really happy we're here together," I said. She smiled and replied, "Me too." We talked about our plans for the future, our hopes, and our dreams. As the night grew quieter around us, we embraced, savoring the warmth and connection we shared. "I love you, Kel," I said, looking into her eyes. "I love you too, Mark," she replied with a gentle smile. We spent the evening talking and enjoying each other's company, filled with affection and a deep bond. As the clock approached midnight, Kelly glanced at her watch and said, "We need to get home. It's almost midnight." "Well, we wouldn't want you to turn into a pumpkin, would we?" I joked, making her laugh. She giggled. "No, we wouldn't, and I think your Camaro might turn into a pumpkin." If this were a fairy tale, I grinned. Good thing this is real life. I've put too much work into that car for it to turn into a pumpkin tonight. I made a playful face, crossing my eyes. Kelly laughed and kissed me. "Take me home, Mark." "Yes, ma'am," I said, smiling as I imagined future conversations. We headed back to the Camaro, ready to face whatever came next together. "I like Mom. I think you should call me that from now on." She gave me her own silly look, and I grinned and kissed her. We dressed, and I gathered up the blanket and towels, putting them in my trunk. I keep my car clean, but I would have to wash out the trunk and wash the towels and blanket in the morning. I dropped her off at her house and walked her to her door. The light was still on, and I could see her father waiting inside for her to get home. I caught a glimpse of her mom too and was suddenly very nervous. "Don't worry, baby. Mama and Daddy love you. You know that. I think we need to talk to them tomorrow, though." She was reading my mind. I knew we would have to break the news to our families about what we wanted to do. Kelly had also elected to join the Army. She was going into MP while I went infantry. She wanted to be a cop, and I was just looking for the adventure. We would be going to MEPS down in Los Angeles in September, so we had the whole summer to spend together. "What happened to Tyrone and Bridget?" you ask. Well, Ty was found the morning after prom. He had been stripped and left on the beach, with Dogie spray painted across his chest and back in neon orange paint. It seems that Max and the guys weren't too thrilled with him and decided to reveal his status to the world. Bridget wasn't anywhere near there, as the guys had taken her home. Turns out she was too embarrassed by what had happened to say anything to anyone. When Ty asked her to talk to the cops about it, she told him she didn't know what he was talking about. Got to love shallow girls. From what Max told me later, they dropped her off first before taking Ty and decorating him with the fitting label. Kelly and I laughed our asses off as Max, Sam, and Dave told the tale of how Ty had kept trying to reason with them, even as they made him strip. Then they held him in place while Max did his best Pablo Picasso impression with the orange can. I never said it was a good impression of Picasso, just his best attempt. Fast forward 3 months, and plans rarely work out the way we want. Kelly and I couldn't get stationed together as boyfriend and girlfriend, and it turned out that we had to wait until after we got out to get married to avoid a long-distance relationship. We had a serious discussion at the airport after my folks dropped us both off. We agreed to go back to being best friends for the duration of our tours. No pressure, and we could see whoever we wanted while we weren't together. We came to an understanding that if we fell in love with other people, we would stay best friends but wouldn't be together while in a relationship with someone else. Yes, it was difficult for both of us. We had spent the entire summer together and figured out what the other liked. Kelly had kept practicing her B-job technique on me, and by the time we left for basic, she was damn good at it. We agreed not to tell each other about any liaisons we had while we were in, and we also agreed to be as safe as possible with whoever we slept with, which meant no intimacy without protection. It was the closest we would ever come to an open relationship, but we weren't technically together anymore at that point. "No, I won't tell you about who I was with while I was in," I said. Kelly never told me, but we both admitted there had been others. Hell, we barely saw each other in those 4 years. We took leave together when we could, but that wasn't very often. There were a few other times we saw each other, but I'll get to that in a moment. We emailed each other constantly. We would call or email and keep in touch. Our conversations were mostly about how our jobs were going and if we were having fun or not. At least they were for the first 2 years. We always ended each conversation with "love you" before hanging up or hitting send. 2 years in, 9 events happened, and we got deployed. We ended up stationed fairly close to each other in Afghanistan, but a world apart. She was placed in a non-combat area in Kandahar while I was in the thick of hunting down the Taliban with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. We were full of patriotism and wanted nothing more than to find the mastermind who had killed thousands of people and bring him to justice. Granted, my idea of justice for him was around between his eyes, a perfect T-zone kill. Unfortunately, I never got a shot at him. Needless to say, we still talked and emailed, but not nearly as frequently as we had before. We met up a couple of times while in Afghanistan and spent a few days getting reacquainted with each other's presence. At that time, those were the best 3 days of my life. We decided not to re-enlist. When it came time to decide whether or not to re-enlist, we wanted to get out of there and be together. It was a rough road we took, and our lives with each other had been put on hold, but we would be together finally. Through the grace of God, we made it out alive from that war zone. We actually went through processing together at Fort Jackson and flew home to LAX together. We joined the Mile High Club that day, and man, it was worth it to be with Kelly again, even if that darn airplane lavatory was barely big enough. When we landed, both of our families were there to greet us. We walked off the plane hand in hand. Having gotten back together over the past couple of days at Jackson and on the plane, we were both dressed in civvies, having changed out of our class uniforms. After processing was complete, both sets of parents could tell right away that we were back together. We finally unlashed our fingers from each other as our parents hugged us. My brother even gave me a hug, realizing that I'd done what he would never have the intestinal fortitude to do, as much as I detest the little toad. Sometimes he's still family. Kelly's sister also joined in. "I'm a hugger," she said. She had grown up quite a bit since we left. She wasn't a gawky beanpole anymore. She'd filled out into a good-looking woman. Yes, I had some fantasies about getting Kelly and Cassie into bed at the same time. I know. I'm a dog, but I'm not enough of a dog to cheat on Kelly at least. I'm not Tyrone, nor will I ever be like Tyrone. Hell, what guy out there hasn't fantasized about having 2 sisters at the same time? Fantasies like the one I entertain about Kelly and Cassie, or just that fantasy. Imagination at work. In other words, it was not going to happen in real life anyway. We decided that we would get jobs and use our GI bills to get some college under our belts. Getting a degree in a good field would ensure our futures. We found an apartment and some part-time jobs and settled into a fairly hectic routine. We still made time for each other, though. I always made time for each other. I'd always liked computers, and I was good with them. So of course I chose computer science as my major. I also got my CompTIA certifications in A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, and Server Plus. I was more than ready to join the workforce. Let it be known that those are some of the most brain-draining tests ever created. I even took the A+ exams in one day, even though it isn't recommended. I barely passed the practical. But that was okay. I passed. After I got my first job in the IT field, I bought the ring, a half-carat diamond and a 24-carat gold setting. I had it sized for her petite finger and boxed it up. Yes, it took most of my credit card to buy it, but I figured I would have it paid off in about 6 or 7 months with my new job. Working as a network technician, I was making some good money. It was worth it. That night, when Kelly got back to our apartment, I had the wine, dinner from Mark, and the ring in the box in my pocket. I don't cook, just to make that clear. I tried once, and it didn't end well. Kelly had received her MBA early, having aced all the necessary courses in record time. We had run a real risk of burning ourselves out, but we managed to keep each other from going completely Looney Tunes. "Hey, beautiful, long day at work," I asked as I took her in my arms and kissed her. She dropped her purse and bag on the counter and kissed me back lovingly. You might say that. Baby, I just found out that Justine is retiring. We're getting some new guy from out of state," she said, rolling her eyes. Now we both love Justine. She'd been kind of a second mom to both of us. It saddened me too, but then I just shrugged. "Well, we can invite her to the wedding," I said with a smile. "Kel, I know I never did this properly when I asked you to marry me, so I'm doing it now." I got down on one knee and pulled the felt-covered box out of my pocket. "Kelly Ly Everett, will you marry me?" As I opened the box, Kelly's eyes went wide, and her smile shone radiantly as she took in the ring I bought her. Yes, she threw her arms around me as she sank to the floor on her knees too. We kissed for what must have been an hour before she finally broke it, and I was able to slide the ring onto her finger. "I love you, Mark," she said as she kissed me again. Once we were standing, she admired the ring and kissed me again. "I love you too, Kel," I replied, kissing my love one more time. We ate in silence, just looking into each other's eyes. We smiled, grinned occasionally, and laughed or giggled. We were both giddy with anticipation. We'd been unofficially engaged for almost 4 years, living together nearly as long, and had been working our bums off in part-time jobs, as well as going to school pretty much year-round. Now I had a full-time job, and was making decent cash. We were officially engaged. Life was good. Kelly was now working full-time at the real estate office, and was the executive assistant to the boss, Mrs. Justine Hart. Mr. David Hart was an ad executive, and between the two of them, they were clearing $1 million a year after taxes. Now Justine was going to retire, and some new guy was coming in to take over the office. Oh well, I'd meet him eventually. Justine and David were good friends, and Kelly was going to miss having Justine as a boss. I couldn't blame her. "So, when is Justine going to officially retire?" I asked as we sat on the couch after dinner. We were snuggled up, just enjoying each other's company as we'd been doing since we got out. It had become another tradition. Enjoying some quiet time after dinner, just the two of us with no other cares in the world, catching up on each other's day. "In a year, so she's going to be around for a while yet," Kelly said. "I'm going to miss her, boo. I don't know this guy coming in. What if he's really tough to deal with?" I shrugged and chuckled. "Don't worry, baby girl. I'm pretty sure he'll be just as impressed with you as Justine was. Going from being an MP to being an executive assistant is a hell of a transition. You did it easily." "Yeah, right," she snorted. "Honey, you have no idea how hard it was to become something totally different from what I was doing for 4 years." I raised an eyebrow and looked into her dark amber eyes. "Oh, let's see. Infantry, sniper, ranger, and 2 tours in Afghanistan, to computer geek. Yep, I guess." I gave her my silly face, eyes crossed and tongue stuck out the side of my mouth, and she actually blushed as she realized what she had just said. "Sorry, boo. You're right," she acknowledged. I laughed. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. So, when do you want to get married?" "ASAP, honey. Honey, I want to be Mrs. Kelly Gallows by the end of the month." She grinned as she said it. I knew we'd get married even back when we were kids. I think I did too. "Damn glad we finally got around to it," I replied with a grin of my own. It dawned on me in that instant that we really were soulmates. Well, that conversation led to us getting together with our families to plan the wedding as soon as possible. Our moms took over the planning, and Kelly and I left the guys out of the loop completely. So we sat around, drank beer, and let the women handle the details. It's great to be a guy sometimes, I thought. We all almost got married before the end of the month. We were actually married on July 4th, which would be an anniversary I would never forget. Kelly was gorgeous in her white wedding dress, and I wore my dress blues. I even got my high and tight haircut back for the occasion. I wanted to look sharp for my lovely bride, and I succeeded. Justine and David came to the wedding and congratulated us. They then did something completely unexpected. They paid for the wedding as their wedding gift to us. It was a traditional Catholic service, which meant it was long and boring. If I hadn't been standing there with Kelly by my side and my friend Kevin beside me in his dress blues too, ready to kick my bomb if I fell out, I might have just fallen asleep. When the priest finally said, "You may kiss the bride," I was more than ready. I lifted Kelly's veil and kissed her lovingly and deeply for a good 2 minutes. At least we were broken from the kiss by the priest himself, who cleared his throat meaningfully. We both blushed as we turned and smiled at our friends and family. Before you start thinking we took any of those new age vows with a bunch of silly or weird promises. No, we wrote our own vows to each other. We definitely included forsaking all others, though. That was the most important one to both of us. We'd walked into the church fully committed to each other already, and we walked out with that commitment not just cemented in our minds, but in the bands of gold around our left ring fingers. "What God hath joined, let no one tear apart," the priest had said. Dan right. Father Kelly and I made love every chance we got. She started putting in longer hours at the office, while I started putting in longer hours at Jones and Sutton Networks as well. We were working 10 or 12-hour days sometimes, but we had one golden rule for making time with each other: no weekends. It cost us both a bit of potential extra cash to keep that promise, but we had enough to put down on a house. At least we were able to move out of the apartment and into our own 3-bedroom ranch-style house shortly after New Year's. We had a lot of fun shopping for furniture and decorating the place. Kelly had a lot of fun, and I just did everything she asked of me. Granted, she always repaid me for my efforts. Moving the furniture around so it was in just the right spot was no problem. And the job as a reward was awesome. Now we had arguments every once in a while. What married couple doesn't? Mostly they were small and meaningless in the grand scheme of things. When we had one, we would talk it out after we calmed down. I found the best way to head off an argument was to say, "Yes, baby," whenever she made a point. I would also take her in my arms and kiss her whenever she was getting irate over something. I couldn't see it helped sometimes. Other times she was really angry. But as always, we would calm down and work it out like normal. We were doing great, married for just under a year and madly in love as we'd been basically since prom. Even when we were seeing others, because long-distance relationships suck, and we didn't want to put ourselves through that kind of pressure, we were still best friends. Now that we were married, we were also still best friends. We continued to talk about anything and everything. I guess a lot of married couples don't do that, but when you've known your spouse all your life and confide all your hopes, dreams, and fears to them, it builds a bond that grows and grows. As I said, we're closer to each other than to our own families. The biggest obstacle so far was when Justine retired and the new guy took over the office. The real estate business had been recovering slowly, and some cuts had to be made. Luckily, with her skills in office management, Kelly was kept on. A few of the sales reps were let go, but Kelly was retained as Richard's executive assistant, just as Justine had promised. Justine had written a glowing recommendation for Kelly, and Richard took it to heart. He also liked Kelly's looks a bit too much, but more about that in a bit. Trouble started about 4 months after Richard Jefferson took over the office, when Justine and Dave were in Tahiti for a second honeymoon. Well, it was the Monday before Thanksgiving of all times. We didn't realize it at the time, but that's when it started. We were still working long hours at our respective jobs. We'd call each other when we got off work, and she'd either start some dinner when she got home, or I would pick up some fast food on my way home. Like I said, I don't cook. We did PT 3 times a week early in the morning, which became part of our routine too. Push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2 or 3 mile run. Usually, we did it together. During one 2-mile run, Kelly told me that Richard had made an inappropriate comment to her at work the day before. What did he say? I asked. He said I had a fine presence, she replied. I laughed. Well, you do. Your presence is one of the many things I love about you. Well, you're my husband. You're allowed to love my presence, she giggled, then turned serious. I'm not a big fan of how Richard has been looking at me lately. That brought me back down to earth as I glanced over at her. She had a worried look on her face. I decided right then and there to find out more about Richard Jefferson. From Kelly's description, he sounded like a bodybuilder or football player who'd kind of let himself go after hitting 40. He was big but had a gut and some love handles. She estimated him to be about 6'3", and around 275 volts. She had said when he first arrived that it was cool to have a brother in management. She thought it would be cool to work with him, and mostly it was. However, he had lately been acting as if he wanted to hit on her. Don't worry, boo. I'm going to do some checking up on Richard Jefferson, I promised her as we got back to the house. Thanks, baby. I don't know, something just doesn't seem right about him, she said with a worried look on her face. Tell you what, I'll drop by and take you to lunch today. Okay, that will give me a chance to meet the guy. I smiled. Her eyes lit up. Great idea, baby. She squealed and threw herself into my arms. Putting the fear of God into him might not be necessary, I smiled back. As long as he respects our marriage and our love for each other, I don't see any harm in some light flirting. But if he decides he still wants a shot at you, I'll do what I have to do. Good, I know you will. Boo. She kissed me again. God, I love that woman. In the morning, I told James, my boss, that I was going to take my wife to lunch. He didn't have a problem with that, and told me to take the rest of the day off. We'd finally finished the Jensen account, and I was going to have a lot more free time until the next big job came in 6 months. Running miles of Cat6 cable and hooking up over 800 computers to Jensen International's internet, then getting their internal server upgraded from 2002 to server 2010 had been a hell of a job. Each computer had been upgraded to Windows 7 from XP, which had taken tons of external hard drives. Now, though, we were going to reap the rewards. More free time, and possibly a vacation. The 10 and 12-hour days were getting to me, and I couldn't wait to tell Kelly what we'd accomplished. She always loves hearing about my job, even if she isn't as computer savvy as I am. I drove my Camaro over to the real estate office and parked right by the front door. Now it was time to go in and see this big boss for myself. As I stepped inside, I saw that Janie was at the front desk. Hey Janie. Hi Mark. You here to pick up? She was cut off by a booming voice. Hey, you must be Mark's husband, Richard Jefferson said as he extended his hand. Sandy married a Mark too, but why would he automatically assume that I was Kelly's Mark and not Kelly's? I shook his hand, making sure that my first 2 fingers were extended. This made it impossible for him to Roman handshake me. That fact wasn't lost on Richard as I smiled affably at him. Actually, I'm Kelly's husband, Mark. You must be Richard Jefferson. Good to meet you. I'm here to pick Kelly up for lunch. The emotions that crossed his face in a few seconds told me everything I needed to know about Jefferson at that time. First was shock, probably at the fact that I was white. Second was confusion, which I attributed to him asking himself why that fine woman would marry this guy outside their own community. Third was a flash of anger that spoke volumes about his character. Another emotion I saw was a twinge of fear, as I obviously wasn't going to let him squeeze my hand into submission. The sense I got was jealousy. I'll give him a little credit for recovering quickly. "Well, it's great to meet you, Mark," he said as he released my hand as if it had been burned. "Kelly should be out in a moment." He then turned on his heel and entered his office, closing the door behind him. I saw him through the window as he pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. He was using an Android, which gave me an idea. I smiled at Janie as I sat down and brought up the apps on my BlackBerry. I activated one and found the signal I was looking for. Then I clumbed that signal. You don't work in it without picking up some useful tips and apps, not to mention a few dirty tricks here and there. Kelly came out of her office and smiled when she saw me. I took her in my arms, and in front of a grinning Janie, I kissed my wife lovingly. Janie is a friend, by the way. She and her husband Tim had hosted the last company Christmas party before Justine retired. This year was going to be our turn. "I have the rest of the day off, baby," I winked at my wife. "Think you can take it off too?" "Well, Thanksgiving is in a couple of days, so probably," my wife replied. "Sounds good, beautiful." I grinned as she gave me a peck on my lips and went to knock on Dick's door. Yeah, that guy could be trouble. While she was talking to him, I sent a bit of spyware to his phone that would keep me apprised of any texts sent or received and any calls he made or received. I also added an option to intercept his outgoing and incoming texts. Yes, folks, it's possible. Scary, right? I also made a new folder for his incoming texts and the numbers he called and who called him. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up whenever I thought about him. Our brief meeting had set off alarms in my brain. I was at DEFCON 3. I knew there was a problem coming, and his name was Dick Jefferson. Know your enemy. Sun Tzu. What he was talking about. Knowledge is power. Which meant I needed to know everything about the man. His likes and dislikes. His marital status, his financials, his history, everything. Kelly came back grinning, ear to ear, saying that Richard had given her the rest of the day off. We laced our fingers as we held hands and left together. We went to Carl's Jr. for lunch, and as we sat there, she asked, "What do you think of Richard?" "Oh, you mean Dick?" I asked with no trace of a smile. "Yeah, I don't like him or trust him. His face betrayed him when he came up to talk to me and found out I was your husband. Not as cool as he tries to act." "What do you mean, boo?" she asked. "I mean that he's either really jealous, doesn't like the fact that I'm your husband, or both." He covered it well, but his face was an open book for a few seconds. I explained I gave her the details on how her boss was acting. Kelly nodded. "So, what are we going to do about him?" I shrugged. "I have a few tricks up my sleeve to keep tabs on him, but until we know what he's planning, if anything, we can't really do much. I have his cell signal cloned and can spy on anything he says or does on that Android of his." Kelly looked at me with her crazy look. I just smiled. "Trust me, baby. I won't do anything unless he does. I'm not going to pick a fight with him. You know, I trust you, boo." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I know, and I trust you too, sweetheart. What I need to know now is how much you've told him about me." I gave her a serious expression. She thought for a moment. "Well, he knows we were both in the Army, but not what we did while we were in. He knows that we went to college on the GI Bill and that you build computers." I smiled. "Good. If he tries to get any more information out of you, just tell him that's all there is to tell. I can do that." She winked and squeezed my hand again. We finished our guacamole bacon burgers, fries, and shakes, then left. We called our bosses and asked for the rest of the week off. When we got home, We fell into bed together, the urge overtaking us again as I kissed her passionately. In case you haven't noticed, I love making love to my wife. We managed to get the rest of the week off due to Thanksgiving and spent the holidays with my family. In spite of my brother, we had a great time and enjoyed some fantastic food. My mom can cook turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, corn, and some damn good smoked ham. On Black Friday, we decided to skip the sales rush, and I started my intel gathering up on Mr. Richard Donald Jefferson. I found out some very useful information on him. Bing is a wonderful tool, much more precise than Google for hard target searches. Mr. Jefferson had a record of assault and battery back east in Newark, New Jersey. It was 20 years old but still on the books. He had served his time and had been clean ever since, as far as anyone knew. The particulars of the case set the alarms going off in my head again. He had beaten up a young man who had come home and caught his wife in bed with Dick. This was before Dick had gotten married. I remembered him at the real estate office, and he hadn't been wearing a wedding ring. More alarms went off in my head. I checked and confirmed that he was still married to Ariel Jefferson. His wife was gorgeous and reminded me quite a bit of Garcelle B. In fact, I then played a hunch and brought up the folder on my phone. I scrolled through his contact list and discovered something that sent a cold chill up my spine. The name Laggard Jimmy was attached to my boss's number. What the hell is Laggard Jimmy? I thought to myself. Laggard, seriously. That had to be a sick joke. I kept scrolling and found a few more numbers where the word laggard was attached to diminutive nicknames for them. I decided to dig a bit deeper and discovered our home phone number listed with Hot Kelly next to it. Well, she is hot. Smoking hot, in fact. But the fact that he had her name with hot attached to it was not a good sign. The beginnings of a plan started to form in my mind as I discovered more and more secrets about Dick. By the time Kelly went out to get lunch for us, I'd already pieced together more than enough to formulate a plan of action. Something bad was coming down the pipe, and we needed to be ready. As soon as Kelly got back with the BK, we sat down and hashed out what we were going to do. She was shocked to see everything I'd been able to dig up on him. I read a trace on all the numbers he had on his phone. Lawyer on speed dial, my boss, our home phone, and a few very unsavory thug types with records. Yes, I was gathering intel on not just him, but his minions or whatever too. I knew what had to be done, when it would be done, and where it would be done. December came just after Thanksgiving, and we had finished all our shopping by the second weekend. The party would be on the 20th, so I had time to get all my pieces on the board set up the way I needed them to be. The night of the party, everyone from Kelly's office showed up, including Dick, of course. The party was a smash hit since we'd hired a caterer to deliver everything in advance for 20 people. One of the numbers listed on Dick's phone had been Rob and Sue Charleston, our next-door neighbors, with the name Laggard Bobby in front of the number. We kept a close eye on them, too. Also, I had wired my house for sight and sound. Every room fed into my BlackBerry on different screens, and the data was being stored on a cloud server. It was ready to do what I needed it to do. I switched the spyware on Dick's phone to forward all texts to me for my approval, and to monitor and record his phone calls to the cloud server as well. And last but not least, I threw in a fail-safe just in case. Like I said, the party was a smash hit. The beer and eggnog were flowing freely, but we had a few designated drivers to get people in vehicles home. We also had a guest room for those who needed to spend the night and didn't have a ride. Strangely enough, but fortunately, nobody had too much to drink. By 11:30 p.m., everyone had left except for Dick. Somehow, I knew that after everyone else had gone, he would still be hanging around. I had been right. Well, Richard, I think it's time we went to bed. I smiled as I gestured for him to leave. I think you're right, Marky, he smirked. Yes, we do need to go to bed, boss. That means you need to go home. Kelly chuckled. Nah, I think we need to have a little chat first. Come on over here and have a seat, he said, going into our living room and sitting down in my recliner while gesturing into the love seat for us to sit. Kelly's eyes widened as she saw him sit in my chair. Oh, he was going to pay for that. Nobody sits in my recliner but me. But I kept my cool as I sat down beside Kelly, and we interlaced our fingers as we looked at him expectantly. "It's your dime," I said with a shrug. "Just make it quick. Kelly and I have to go to bed since we have to wrap presents in the morning." He sat back and crossed his legs. "We need to talk about your marriage and what's going to happen here tonight." "Well, you're going to leave, and we're going to bed," I shrugged back. "Simple." "I'm afraid not, Marky," he said with a smirk. There was Marky again. Oh, I was going to enjoy what happened next. "Oh, then what's going to happen, Richard?" I asked with a smile. "Well, you have a fine wife there," he said, giving Kelly a compliment while pissing me off at the same time. His tone was one of authority. "Yes, she is, and she's all mine." I smiled and squeezed Kelly's hand as she smiled at me. I winked back at her. "Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Mark already knows I'm fine," though she giggled. "You're welcome, honey," Dick said, grinning ear to ear. He then turned back to me. "Mark, you need to give up. You can't match my size, and I know you can't satisfy this fine sister." Kelly laughed. "Mr. Jefferson, that's very inappropriate. And let me tell you, Mark satisfies me just fine." She had a smile on her face. "I don't appreciate you coming in here and talking about him like you know him." "But I do know him, baby. He's a person who can't satisfy you. You know that," he exclaimed with an incredulous look on his face. "I know that Mark satisfies me more than any other man alive." Kelly smirked at him. Yeah, this wasn't going at all like Dick thought it would, or maybe he thought it was going the way he wanted, but the end result would be the same. "Oh yeah?" he asked, standing abruptly and dropping his pants right there. "The answer is still going to be no," she said, squeezing my hand as she shook her head at him, and gave that "you ain't getting none" gesture. Now it really wasn't going according to his plan, but was still well within the parameters of mine. "Come on, you arrogant. Give me my cue." I focused on his face again as frustration ran across it, followed by the arrogant expression. "Well, it would be in both of your best interests to do what I say when I say it, or you'll both be out of a job," he snarled. Now he was losing his cool. A bad move on his part. "Oh, and how will you take my job, Dick?" I asked with a smirk of my own. "Because your boss is one of my imbeciles," he damn near shouted at me. "Oh, is he?" I shrugged, and one word from me. "You're out of a job, nutless." I just sat back and put my arm around Kelly, looking at him as I pulled my BlackBerry out of my shirt pocket and brought up the menu. "Well, I don't think that laggard Jimmy is going to be a problem for us." I smiled as I selected the file I wanted in the folder. Oh, the look on Dick's face was priceless. "Okay, you asked for it. I was hoping to avoid this, since I wanted that sweet piece of bomb beside you to myself, but you leave me no choice," he said. He took out his Android, brought up a text, and hit send. It was already pre-programmed in there, but what he sent wasn't what he'd written. "You see, I know him. I know my enemy. I also know myself, but most importantly, I know my wife. I know wives aren't mentioned in that passage of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, but they should be. Hen, you really have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Kelly was shaking her head sadly at Dick. Just then, our doorbell rang. "I'll get it," Kelly said as she jumped up and walked briskly to the door. I took that moment to grin as he looked at me. "Those are my homies now. Wonder Bread, that little sister is going to be ours in just a minute, and you're going to be able to watch us take what's ours. This is a reclamation," he said. "Oh, boo, look who just showed up." Kelly re-entered the room, bringing a woman who looked a lot like Garcelle B with her. "Hello, Mark. I am Christina. I'm the wife of the idiot with his tool hanging out there," she said as she extended her hand. I rose to meet her and shook her hand politely. "Good to meet you, Christina. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding here. It seems your husband is under the impression that he's going to have an encounter with my wife tonight. Were you aware of that?" I asked. I shot a glance at Dick, and he had finished putting his pants back on. "How? Where? What?" Dick, the douchebag, asked. "Where the hell is my crew?" "Oh, they just tried breaking into Chief Swanson's house. The cops knew about them from an anonymous tip, so they were snatched up in a hurry." I smiled at him. "I hope they don't squeal on you to save their own hides. That would be quite a shame." "Oh my God," he whispered to himself. More than anyone else, he knew his house of cards was falling down around him. "God, my friend has nothing to do with this," I said, turning to Christina. "Mrs. Jefferson, what is going to happen to Dick here?" Dick looked up with such fear in his eyes that I wondered how the arrogant Sun Tzu witch could have been this damn stupid. "Well, thanks to your heads up this past weekend, he's going to be sleeping someplace other than our house tonight. I'm also pretty sure that he won't be sleeping here either," she said, giving Dick a nasty sneer. She then reached into her coat and produced a manila envelope, which she handed to Mr. Dick. "You're served," she said with finality. "Now it's time for you to leave." I smiled and gestured towards the door. Dick started walking, and I moved out of his way a bit so he could pass me on the way out. I was expecting what happened next, but he wasn't expecting my reaction. He lunged for me, intent on wrapping his hands around my throat. I stepped aside and used my left knee to break a few of his ribs as I snapped a punch into his nose, causing his eyes to water. I then kicked him extremely hard right in the family area. As he backed up, stunned, and holding his fractured ribs, I said calmly, "Bad move." Yes, the adrenaline was flowing through me, and I was riding the waves of it as the fight part of fight or flight took over. I launched a series of punches into his face and gut, with 2 to the solar plexus in rapid succession. He couldn't see, and he couldn't breathe very well. I then delivered a couple of snap kicks to his knees, knocking him down. Finally, I hit 911 on my phone to report a belligerent party guest who had just tried to assault my wife and me. I reported that I had subdued him, but that he might need medical attention. The police and an ambulance were dispatched immediately to our address. After they had all left, I turned to Christina as Kelly and I both hugged her. "I'm really sorry about this, Christina. I know he's your husband, but at this time of year," I was interrupted. "Honey, listen, you two gave me the perfect Christmas gift." "No, Richard," she said. We all laughed together. "Merry Christmas to you too. Merry Christmas, Christina," I added as I joined in the hug. Dick ended up being charged with indecent exposure, assault, sexual assault, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and conspiracy to commit felony assault. His confession was already on tape with video to back it up, and I sent those to the cops with my compliments. Dick's lawyer tried to cut a plea deal, but the DA wasn't having it. In the end, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His crew, all ex-cons with 2 felonies each for various offenses, attempted to break into the chief of police's house and earned life in prison under the 3-time loser law, along with their buddy Dick. It seems they thought Dick had set them up for some odd reason. Well, needless to say, Dick didn't fare too well in the joint. The cuz found him swinging in his cell 3 months after he first arrived. He had been badly beaten before he committed suicide, but nobody saw anything. How did I do it? How did I set everything up? For those who haven't realized it by now, I knew my enemy. Everything in Sun Tzu's masterpiece can be applied to any given situation when it comes to dealing with an adversary. Another favorite piece of wisdom in the art of war is to fight the enemy where he isn't. I called up Christina and got her on my side when I explained the situation to her. Dick wasn't there, so I fought him there. Christina had always suspected him of cheating, but could never get any proof. He had control of their finances, and she couldn't get the money together to hire a PI without him finding out. But it all came down to knowing my enemy. When all was said and done, Dick was an arrogant fool. He thought he knew it all, and that I would cave. Why on earth would he think that? Well, I had Kelly feed him misinformation about me when he questioned her about my time in the army. Kelly said I was a clerk with no combat experience. Having no reason to disbelieve her, he bought it. James, my boss, in case you were wondering, wasn't too broken up about Dick getting thrown in the pen and dying there. In fact, as soon as that happened, he divorced his cheating wife and got away relatively unscathed. He had not been a willing participant since Dick had threatened him and his children. Dick was a strong-armed type thug. He was well-educated and highly intelligent, but his arrogance made him stupid. He thought that his prowess was enough to get any woman into bed. Unfortunately, those women thought for themselves and didn't really love their husbands. Kelly loves me and thinks with her heart.